Hey guys, I'm Sam, a teen Detroit Tigers fan, and today we're looking at the Detroit Tigers infield entering spring training. Today we're looking at 10 infielders, corner infielders and middle infielders. They are Spencer Torkelson, Zach McKinstry, Andre Lipcius, Colt Keith, Javier Baez, Ryan Kreidler, Eddys Leonard, Jace Jung, Matt Vierling, and Wenceel Perez. These are every single infielder who is showing up to spring training this year, non-roster invitee and roster invitee. First up, we have the number 1 overall pick from 2020, Spencer Torkelson. He was good last year, hitting 31 home runs, but he plays first base primarily, and so he doesn't always have a ton of value on the field, and he doesn't hit for a ton of average. He just hits for a decent amount of power. Last year, he had 66 extra base hits and 3 stolen bases, but almost half of those were home runs. He's a solid hitter with a really good hard hit rate of 50.9%, good barrel rate of 14.1, good average exit velocity at 91.8, and a good X slugging from last year at 487. However, he didn't always live up to those expectations, and he only had an OPS of 759 last year. I expect amazing things from Torkelson. He's 24 years old, number 1 overall pick, one of the best hitters in a long time coming out of college, and so I do think that his defensive shortcomings will not be the biggest of deals at a position of first base. I do think that his bat will do well. I think that his OPS will be even better with more average and more contact, and I think that his power is really going to show next year. I think Spencer Torkelson is our starting first baseman for sure, unless something very bad happens to him in spring training. Next up, Zach McKinstry. He spent a lot of time in the infield last year, but he's definitely a utility man. Zach McKinstry played 148 games last year for the Tigers, hitting 231, 302, 351. His OPS plus was 79, but he played, I think, almost every position except catcher. I think he played everywhere but catcher, which is kind of crazy. He's good at fielding. He's a decently fast runner. He throws really hard. His arm strength is 93.3 as his max exit velocity, but also he's not a great hitter. There were some times where he looks decent, but also he just doesn't. He shows flashes, but I don't think he's going to be as good of a hitter as some of the other guys on this team. But last year was his second best year offensively after 2021 by OPS, but by OPS Plus, last year was his best year. Zach McKinstry, he's our ultimate utility man, and he can play just about anywhere on the field. Up next, a guy who's definitely fallen from the grace of baseball gods, Javier Baez. His numbers have just significantly declined since the Tigers signed him, and I just think he was a bad signing, even as soon as we signed him. Last year, he had 9 home runs. 9. An OPS of 593 for an OPS plus of 62. He struck out 125 times and took 24 walks. So he walked 1 every 5 strikeouts. So with that said, his strikeout rate is getting better. He only strikes out 22.9% of the time, but those are an ugly 22.9% of the time. And he walks 4.4% of the time. So that's bad. But also, none of the other stuff really looks good as well. His barrel percentage is low, his average exit velocity is low, his X slug is low. So in general, last year was not a good year, and he chases too much. So a combination of the fact that he chases, he doesn't walk, and stuff makes it seem like this contract was a really, really bad year. I also think that Javier Baez is sort of overrated defensively. Just from like fielding stats, he made 19 errors last year, which is a lot of errors. I mean, those aren't like, he still has good range, he still has decent arm strength, so he's not actually a bad defender, but he just looks like he's either a really good defender some days or really bad, and so he's like really hit or miss. He hasn't really been good since like 2018 and 2019. 2021 he was decent, but he also struck out 184 times. So I don't think the Tigers should have signed him to that massive contract after one decent season between the Mets and the Cubs. So Tigers, bad signing for Javier Baez. But we don't really have another shortstop, so he's probably going to make the roster just because of how much we're paying him. Colt Keith is only 22 years old, and and he still made the 40-man roster and is going to spring training this year. He is currently MLB number 22 rated prospect in baseball, and last year got up to AAA Toledo, where he hit 13 home runs and had an 890 OPS over 67 games. He did way better at Erie in AA with a 977 OPS and 14 home runs, so in 59 games. And Colt Keith, he's a great prospect. He's probably gonna have second base under control if he does well in spring training. Colt Keith, we don't have a ton of depth at second base or third base right now. And those are two of the positions where he plays the most. He is not fast, he's not great at defense, but he hits really well and he hits up for a lot of power. So I do think that the 2020 fifth round pick who came out of nowhere fairly recently in 2022 is a top prospect, the number 2 prospect for the Tigers, and will be a big piece this year if the Tigers are to make the playoffs. Up next, Lipcius. I saw him play in 2022 and I think 2023 as well, and he had his first cup of coffee last year in the big leagues, hitting his first home run. Last year, he spent much of his time in Toledo, hitting 272, 363, 419 for an OPS of 782 in AAA. He also hit 11 home runs. He's more of a utility man, playing all over the infield and a bit of the corner outfield as well in his time at Toledo. I do think that Lipcius, he is 25 and pretty old. The 2019 third rounder has a decent shot of making the roster, even as one of the last men on the board. He's not that fast, but he can just do what he can do decently. He's still something of a prospect, albeit not a great one. He did come out of nowhere and did hit well in previous years. I do think that he is the guy that can do something if he's given a good opportunity. I think he's on the bubble for making the Tigers roster. However, I do think the Tigers just don't need another utility guy, and so he's probably their third option at utility. So he's probably going to be in AAA, but if he does really well, who knows? Might know his name sooner rather than later. Ryan Kreidler is up next as a defense-first infielder for the Tigers. He was injured for much of last year. He's had a cup of coffee in both 2022 and 2023, playing a total of 37 games. However, his career OPS plus is 24 and career OPS is 429. He can play a lot of positions on the infield, playing third and short primarily, and so if Javier Baez does really badly, he might take his spot. One of the Tigers' weak positions right now is third base, and so I do think Ryan Kreidler might have a chance to come out and take that first base spot if Matt Vierling isn't playing there. I think that he is a good backup third baseman and can definitely field the ball, which is not something the Tigers were very good at third base last year. Not that I could do any better. He's projected to not play very much, but he also could play more than people think. That he isn't that good. I don't think he's that good. I don't think he's a great prospect. He's 26 years old already. But Ryan Kreidler could be a solid defensive player, and if we look at stuff like his AAA time in AA in 2021 and AAA, he was pretty darn good. And so I think that he could theoretically be a good performer for the Tigers, have a good impact for them, and maybe even start if he does really well in spring training. However, spring training isn't everything, especially when there's someone who has a much better spot or has the lock on that position. Emphasis of last year, Parker Meadows led the team in home runs in spring training, I think with 4 or 5, and then he didn't make the majors. So a lot of spring training is also all up to whether these guys actually fit on the team, rather than not just if they perform well. Eddys Leonard has yet to play a game in the MLB, and he's the 29th ranked prospect for the Tigers, but he does have some potential and is a shortstop and played his first licks of AAA baseball last year. He's been in the Dodgers organization for a while, and he's currently 23 years old, and I do think that he can be solid. However, he's young, he doesn't really have a spot on this team, so he's probably just another depth piece. Eddys Leonard had a 302 average and a 530 slugging last year in AAA in 40 games. In AA with the Dodgers, he had a 327 WP and a 411 slugging percentage, which led him to be a round average hitter with decent fielding, decent speed, decent everything. He was a free agent signing from the Dominican Republic, and I do think that Eddys Leonard will have a spot at some point as he's a young guy. But this year's not his year, but he is on the Tigers 40 man, and so there is a slight chance he makes the team. Probably not out of opening day though. Jace Jung, brother of Josh Jung, the Texas Rangers second baseman, is a Tigers prospect, a non-roster invitee to Major League Spring Training this year. He's 23 years old and was drafted in the first round in 2022 at Texas Tech. And Jace Jung has a decent shot of, well, not a decent shot. He's practicing with the MLB squad because he was a top prospect, a high pick. I don't think he has any shot at making the majors this year, but he did go to Major League Spring Training, and so maybe at the end of the year, as a September call-up, he might be there. He hasn't played anywhere higher than Double-A yet, and played 47 games at Double-A last year. He was good. I do think that JC at Double-A with his 154 WRC plus, 2% better than the average hitter, is a good sign. If he does play in the majors, he's going to be definitely worse than that, but he does have some power, a lot of power, a decent hit tool, but he isn't a great speed or fielder. But the fielding is something that can be worked on, and he isn't the slowest guy in the world. He isn't Miggy anymore. And so Jace Jung, 2022 first rounder, is getting more reps with the MLB squad, which is a good sign, and I do think he might be ready to be a September call-up in 2020. Matt Vierling is the next guy we're going to talk about. Last year, he had a 96 OPS plus, so around league average, and played a lot of positions. He's mostly a third and first baseman, meaning he's mostly going to play third base and outfield for us, and he has good defensive numbers. He can throw pretty well, and he is very fast, so he can cover a lot of ground. Matt Vierling, mainly a third baseman for the Tigers, because that's our weakest position. It's between him and Ryan Kreidler, I think, there at this point. But I do think Matt Vierling is around an average hitter. Good things. I mean, if we really wanted to address our problems, we could sign Matt Chapman for a year or two. But I don't think that is really feasible. Matt Vierling gets on base a decent amount, just doesn't hit for a ton of power, but he also doesn't strike out too much, and he walks a decent amount. So he's around the average in both of those. He doesn't swing and miss. This is his big thing. He doesn't swing and miss. He's fast. He hustles. And so all of those combine to a decent XBA overall. Matt Vierling is probably the Tigers' starting third baseman, or will start in the outfield sometimes, and might even be a backup first baseman if need be. The last guy on our list is Wenceel Perez. He played 110 games or so between single A, double A, and triple A last year. He was an above average hitter with an WRC plus at triple A at 124, single A at 153, and double A at 104. His hitting is not where he shines though. He has a decent potential hit tool. But he doesn't hit for much power. Mostly a speed and fielding focused infielder. He's a second baseman, shortstop combo, and he can make contact. He does run a lot. He had 19 stolen bases in double A last year. And I do think that Wenceel Perez is already 24. He's on the cusp of making the MLB roster, but he still hasn't played a lick in MLB, and he's getting older, so his ETA is just being pushed back over and over again, just because the Tigers don't really have a place for him to play. I think that infield and outfield are both sort of crowded, but because we don't really have anyone who stands out, we have like our guys, but we have some depth overall, and I think Wenceel Perez is a depth piece, but he could be a starter if worse comes to worse. Overall, I think the infield is going to be Spencer Torkelson at first, Colt Keith at second, Javier Baez at short, and Matt Vierling at third. This probably won't be the lineup at the end of the year, but it's certainly, in my opinion, going to be the lineup at the start of the year, at least in the infield. Thanks for listening to Teen Talks Tigers and listening to me ramble on about the Tigers' infield. Have a great day, and remember, go Tigers!